Emily's eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she noticed was the brightness. The room was almost painfully white, and the walls seemed too smooth, too clean, as if they had never known dust or wear. Her head throbbed, each pulse echoing in her skull like a warning drum. She tried to move, but her arms felt heavy, as if someone had pressed them down with invisible weights. She blinked several times, trying to make sense of the shapes around her. Strange machines lined the walls, tall metallic frames with blinking lights, tubes, and wires that seemed to hum faintly. She couldn't recognize any of it. Behind a sheet of thick glass, a group of people in white coats watched her carefully. One of them, a man with neat brown hair and glasses, stepped forward. He smiled, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made Emily shiver. "We are here to unlock the secrets of your mind," he said in a calm, measured voice. His tone suggested kindness, but Emily didn't feel it. She felt like prey under a predator's gaze. Emily's heart raced and she took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady herself. Panic rose inside her, but she forced it down. She knew that if she panicked, they would notice and use it against her. Instead, she focused on watching them. Her eyes moved across the room, taking in every detail. She noticed that the scientists moved in certain patterns. Some would step forward only when another moved aside, and one always checked a small panel near the door before approaching her. Emily noticed the machines too. Some had screens that flickered with strange symbols and numbers she didn't understand, but she could see which ones lit up when a person pressed a button. A tube would extend or a light would flash. It was as if the room itself was alive, but only when the scientists made it so. She realized that these little signals could give her information, clues about how the room worked. Even if she didn't know the purpose of each device, she could observe the patterns and remember them. Dr. Harris, the man who had spoken first, walked slowly toward her. He carried a small tablet and tapped on it occasionally, glancing up at her face. "Your cooperation will make this process faster," he said. "We only want to understand your mind. You have nothing to fear." Emily's lips pressed together. She wanted to ask questions, to demand answers, but she knew it would not help. Questions could be used against her. She had to act as if she believed him while secretly learning everything she could. She shifted slightly in her seat, testing how restrained she really was. The straps on her wrists and ankles held her firmly, but they didn't prevent her from noticing small gaps in their vigilance. The scientist who monitored the controls would look away for a few seconds while typing, and another would turn his back to retrieve something from a cabinet. These small moments were all she needed to start planning. She tried to recall what had happened before she woke up in this place. Her memory was foggy, filled with gaps. She remembered walking through a corridor, then a sharp pain in her neck, and then nothing. Her mind felt like a puzzle with missing pieces, but she refused to panic. Instead, she focused on what she could control, the here and now. Observing, remembering, and understanding. The scientists continued their work. One moved a robotic arm closer to her, adjusting sensors near her head. Lights flickered and a soft hum filled the room. Emily felt a tickle in her mind, like the machines were trying to probe her thoughts, to pull secrets out of her brain. She clenched her teeth and forced herself to think of nothing important, letting her mind appear empty. She imagined herself as calm water, reflecting everything around her without revealing what lay beneath. She watched Dr. Harris write notes on his tablet. Each movement, each glance, gave her information. She noticed that when he tapped the screen twice, the machine nearest her would shift slightly. When another scientist adjusted a dial, a screen would flash a new color. Even if she didn't understand what it meant, she knew it was important. She began to memorize which action caused which effect, mentally creating a map of the room, the people, and the machines. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, it was hard to tell. Time had no meaning in this strange, bright prison. The scientists spoke quietly among themselves, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes sighing. Emily realized they were confident she could not escape. Their confidence was her advantage. They underestimated her. They thought she was just a subject, a mind to be studied, not a person capable of thinking beyond the room. She started to test small things. When a scientist left the room, she moved her fingers slightly, pretending to fidget. She watched for reactions, noting which gestures made the scientists notice and which went unnoticed. She experimented with small movements of her feet and legs, seeing if the straps would alert them. Each little observation added to her understanding. Each small test was a step toward a plan she hadn't fully formed yet, but which was slowly taking shape in her mind. Emily's eyes wandered to the ceiling, to the cameras mounted high above. She imagined what the cameras saw, how they transmitted her image to screens. She pretended to fall asleep, to close her eyes and let the cameras capture nothing but stillness. Yet in her mind, she replayed every movement of every person in the room, every pattern she had noticed, every sound she had heard. She was building a memory of the room that no one else could erase. As the day went on, Emily realized something else. She had to survive, not just escape. Survival meant learning everything about them, everything about the machines, and everything about her own mind. They could not break her if she remained sharp, clever, and observant. Every test they conducted, every attempt to read her thoughts, was giving her the information she needed to turn the situation around. Dr. Harris returned with a tray of devices, each one unfamiliar. He spoke softly, "We need to test your responses. It is important for science." Emily forced a calm expression. She knew these tests were just more chances to watch, to learn, and to plan. Each beep, each flash, each adjustment was a clue. She noted the order of the devices, the timing of each step, and the way the scientists moved together. Even in this terrifying place, Emily found a strange sense of focus. Her fear did not disappear, but it became fuel. She realized that her mind was her weapon, sharper and faster than any machine. If she could outthink them, she could survive. If she could outthink them, she could find a way out. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a spark of confidence. She would not be broken. They might control the room, the machines, and the schedules, but they did not control her mind. Night fell, or perhaps the room's lighting changed to simulate night. Emily could not tell. The scientists continued their quiet observation, confident she was trapped. She closed her eyes for a moment, pretending to rest, while her mind replayed everything she had seen. She imagined the paths she could take, the ways to manipulate the devices, and the moments when the scientists were vulnerable. Each scenario in her mind brought her closer to understanding her escape. And in that sterile, bright room, Emily made a silent promise to herself. She would not be a subject. She would not be a victim. Every test, every observation, every small weakness she had noticed would one day work in her favor. And when the moment came, they would see just how clever a human mind could be. She would outsmart them, not with strength, but with intelligence, patience, and careful planning. For now she stayed calm. She observed. She learned. And slowly she began to feel that even in captivity she held the power. They thought they were in control, but she knew better. And she was ready for the day when she could prove it. 4 days, Emily was trapped in the sterile room, subjected to a series of experiments she could barely understand. Every morning, bright lights flooded the chamber, and strange machines whirred and blinked as if alive. Scientists in white coats moved around her like dancers in a precise, controlled routine. Each test was designed to push her mind, to probe her thoughts, and to measure her reactions. Machines flashed colors and images, and screens displayed strange symbols and patterns that Emily had never seen before. At first, Emily tried to make sense of the tests. One machine displayed a series of shapes, and she had to press buttons to indicate what she saw. Another machine showed faces, some familiar, some alien, and asked her to remember them. She realized quickly that no matter what the scientists intended, each test revealed more about their methods than about her. She began observing carefully, watching how the machines responded to her actions, how the scientists reacted to her every choice. She noticed small patterns. If she hesitated for too long before pressing a button, the machines would pause, waiting for her input. If she pressed too quickly, alarms would beep softly, and one of the scientists would frown at a screen. She began to control her responses deliberately, pretending to struggle while secretly noting the timing and effect of each device. She understood the machines better than the scientists expected. Emily also learned about the people around her. Dr. Harris often watched her most closely, tapping his tablet and making notes. A younger scientist named Paul monitored the screens, but he sometimes glanced away for a few seconds, giving Emily opportunities to test the limits of her restraints. A third scientist, Claire, handled the mechanical arms and sensors, but her movements were slow and careful. Emily memorized each person's habits, understanding which moments were safe for small experiments of her own. One day a test involved memory. Machines displayed a sequence of numbers, flashing them quickly on a screen. Emily was supposed to repeat the sequence aloud. She pretended to fumble, intentionally giving the wrong numbers at first. The scientists frowned but adjusted the sequence, thinking she was struggling with the exercise. Emily smiled inwardly. She had learned something important. By appearing weaker, she could make them underestimate her. She could lead them to believe they were learning her limits while she learned theirs. Another day, a machine projected moving shapes in bright colors. Emily had to follow them with her eyes and press a button when two shapes matched. Again she pretended to struggle, pressing the wrong button occasionally. The machine beeped, lights flashed, and the scientist jotted notes furiously. But Emily's mind was working faster than ever. She noticed that certain buttons didn't just interact with the machine, they caused subtle changes in the room. A panel would click open for a brief second, or a small light would blink on the far side of the chamber. These small clues were pieces of a puzzle she was slowly assembling. Emily began to understand the layout of the room in detail. Every machine, every wire, every panel had a purpose. Some were obvious, like the screens and lights. Others were subtle, hidden in plain sight, controlling doors, alarms, or the robotic arms that moved around her. She realized that if she could remember the patterns and controls, she might be able to manipulate the environment in her favor one day. She also learned about the scientist's reactions. Dr. Harris would often step back and speak quietly into a communicator, giving instructions to the others. Paul would glance at Emily with curiosity, sometimes with doubt, sometimes with frustration. Claire handled the machines methodically, unaware of the small things Emily observed. The humans, in their confidence and routine, gave Emily the advantage. They thought she was only a test subject, but in truth she was a careful observer, a student of their habits. Sometimes the experiments were more invasive. A helmet-like device would be placed on her head, small electrodes touching her temples. Lights would flash, sounds would play, and the machine would try to measure her brain's activity. Emily forced herself to remain calm, imagining herself as water reflecting light without revealing anything beneath the surface. She thought of nothing important, of nothing personal, while keeping her mind sharp and alert. Every flash, every beep, every twitch of the electrodes was information. She was learning how the machine worked, how it reacted to her thoughts, how she could control it. Emily also noticed the subtle rules of the room. If she tried to move too quickly, alarms would sound, and the scientists would intervene immediately. But if she moved carefully, watching for the exact moment when no one was looking, she could test boundaries. She practiced small shifts in her position, testing her restraints, testing the limits of her observation. Each attempt was careful, measured, and precise. She had learned to blend patience with action. The scientist grew frustrated at her apparent difficulty. Dr. Harris muttered to himself, "She's clever, but she's not cooperating fully." Emily smiled faintly to herself. They thought they were in control, but they were feeding her intelligence and opportunity with every test. Every machine that was supposed to measure her was actually teaching her how to navigate the room, how to predict the scientist's moves, and how to anticipate the consequences of her actions. One afternoon, Emily noticed a small panel near the corner of the room that occasionally opened when Paul adjusted the machines. Inside, she glimpsed wires and controls that seemed to affect the doors. She didn't understand all the connections yet, but she memorized the location and timing. It was a weakness she could exploit later. She realized that every machine, every door, every panel had a rhythm, and if she could learn the rhythm, she could control the room. Emily began rehearsing scenarios in her mind. She imagined the scientist distracted, the machines responding to her actions, and the doors unlocking one by one. She practiced small movements, visualizing the path she would take when the time came. She imagined herself outsmarting them without violence, using patience, observation, and cleverness. Each day of experiments was now part of her training, each test a lesson in survival and strategy. Even as the scientists continued their experiments, Emily felt a growing sense of power. They had thought her mind was theirs to probe, but in reality she was learning faster than they could imagine. She understood their methods, their weaknesses, and even their confidence in her limitations. They underestimated her because they thought she was only a subject, but Emily was more than that. She was an observer, a thinker, a strategist. By the end of the week, Emily could anticipate nearly every test. She knew when the lights would flash, when the buttons would respond, and how each scientist would react to her actions. She had memorized every detail of the room, every rhythm of the machines, and every habit of the humans around her. She was ready to act when the moment came, ready to turn the situation to her advantage. Emily realized something important. Intelligence was her weapon. While they tried to control her mind, she was learning theirs. Every experiment that was meant to break her instead made her stronger. Every observation, every small manipulation, every false response she gave, built a foundation for her escape. And somewhere deep inside she felt a growing certainty, she would not be trapped forever. They thought she was just a subject. They thought she was weak. They thought they controlled everything. Emily knew better. With patience, observation, and cleverness she was already winning. The day would come when she would prove it, when she would use the knowledge she had gained to escape, to survive, and to outsmart them all. Emily had spent countless hours watching, listening, and thinking. Every detail of the room, every movement of the scientists, and every machine had been recorded carefully in her mind. She understood the patterns of the facility better than anyone else. But knowledge alone was not enough. She needed a plan, a way to turn all the information she had collected into a path to freedom. She began by leaving subtle clues for herself. Tiny scratches on the floor near corners and doors served as guides. Marks on the walls, barely noticeable, reminded her of which panels controlled what. Even small, unnoticed smudges on glass screens helped her remember which buttons and levers had specific effects. Each mark was placed carefully so that the scientists would never notice, but so she could follow them when the time came. Emily also memorized the schedules of the scientists. Dr. Harris moved in a precise rhythm, checking his tablet, tapping it twice, then walking to another machine. Paul, the younger assistant, often left his post at predictable times to adjust wires or retrieve equipment. Claire, who handled the robotic arms, had small moments when she focused entirely on a machine and ignored the room. Emily noted every detail, knowing that a single misstep could ruin her plan. Timing was everything. She realized early on that brute force would not work. The restraints were strong, the doors were locked, and the machine seemed designed to detect any sudden movement. Strength alone could not free her. Only careful thought, observation, and clever use of the environment could succeed. She had to outthink them, to anticipate their moves, and to use their own technology against them. Each test, each experiment they conducted, gave her more information about how the facility worked and how the humans who controlled it behaved. Emily practiced in her mind over and over. She imagined herself moving slowly across the room, shifting just enough to test the limits of her restraints without triggering alarms. She imagined pressing certain buttons in a precise order to make lights flash, doors unlock, or panels open. She ran the scenarios hundreds of times in her mind, each time refining her movements, adjusting her timing, and predicting the scientists' reactions. By the time she was done, she knew the room almost as well as they did. She also considered distractions carefully. The scientists were confident and focused but not perfect. They had habits and routines that could be used against them. A sudden beep from a machine, a flicker of light, or a small misstep could draw their attention long enough for Emily to act. She imagined manipulating the environment so that they were forced to respond to false signals while she moved silently toward her goal. Timing and observation would be her greatest tools. Emily's preparation extended to the machines themselves. She had memorized which buttons affected what, which lights indicated certain doors, and which panels could be manipulated to create small delays. Every test she had endured before had been a lesson, a way to teach her how the facility responded. She understood the connections, even if she did not know the full purpose of each device. This understanding was enough. She could use the machines to help her escape rather than hinder her. She also considered the possibility of mistakes. She imagined alarms going off, a door not opening, or a scientist noticing her movements. For each scenario, she devised a response. She practiced staying calm, thinking clearly, and acting quickly. Her mind became a tool as sharp as any weapon. Patience was essential. Acting too quickly could ruin everything. Acting too slowly could also fail. She had to find the perfect balance. Emily began to visualize the sequence of her escape. First, she would wait for a moment when the scientist's attention was divided. Dr. Harris would be checking a new reading, Paul would be adjusting wires, and Claire would be focused on a mechanical arm. That would be her chance. She would move carefully, using the knowledge she had gathered from previous tests to manipulate panels and machines. Each door, each control, each light had a role in her plan. She also prepared backup options. If a door did not open as expected, she had memorized alternative routes through the room. If a machine malfunctioned, she knew which panel could override it. If a scientist approached unexpectedly, she had rehearsed ways to draw their attention elsewhere. Emily was building a plan that could adapt to almost any obstacle. Flexibility, she knew, was just as important as careful planning. Her mental rehearsals became almost daily rituals. She would close her eyes, imagining herself moving through the facility with perfect precision. She would see the flashing lights, the beeping machines, the predictable movements of the scientists. She imagined herself slipping past cameras, opening doors silently, and making her way to the outer gates. Each simulation in her mind brought her closer to being ready for the real moment. Emily also used small experiments to test the limits of the facility. She shifted slightly in her restraints, observing how the machines reacted. She pressed buttons in unusual sequences, noting which actions caused alarms and which went unnoticed. She learned how to make small changes without detection and how to anticipate the scientists' reactions. Each experiment, while seemingly small, was a crucial part of her preparation. Even as she planned, Emily remained outwardly compliant. She pretended to cooperate with the tests, giving the scientists the impression that they were in control. She would fumble with buttons, hesitate when responding, and even appear confused. Each act of obedience was a lie, carefully designed to reinforce the scientists' false sense of confidence. They believed she was just a subject, a mind to study, unaware that she was planning, rehearsing, and preparing her escape. Emily also considered the final steps of her plan, leaving the facility. She imagined reaching the outer doors, manipulating the locks, and stepping outside into the night. She envisioned moving quietly through the surrounding area, avoiding cameras, sensors, and patrols. Beyond the building lay freedom, and she knew she had to plan not just for escape but for survival after she left. Her mind was focused on every step, every challenge, every potential obstacle. The more Emily planned, the more confident she became. The experiments that had once terrified her now served as lessons, tools for learning, and opportunities to refine her strategy. She understood that her success depended on patience, observation, and intelligence. Physical strength mattered little, cleverness mattered everything. She had the advantage because they did not recognize her true skill. By the end of several days, Emily's plan was complete in her mind. She had mapped the room, memorized the scientists' routines, identified the weaknesses in the machines, and rehearsed every movement she would need. She had considered contingencies, distractions, and alternative routes. Every detail was accounted for, and every step had a purpose. She was ready to act when the right moment came. Emily felt a quiet determination growing inside her. They had thought she was powerless, that her mind could be studied and controlled. But she was no longer a subject. She was a strategist, a planner, and a thinker. She had turned every fear, every test, every observation into an advantage. The moment of escape would require patience, precision, and courage, and she was ready to meet it. Even as the scientists continued their routines, Emily's mind worked tirelessly. She refined the plan, anticipated possible errors, and visualized the sequence of actions again and again. Every day of observation, every subtle mark she left for herself, every calculation of timing had prepared her for this moment that had not yet come. She was ready. The room that had once seemed like a prison now felt like a chessboard, each scientist a predictable piece, each machine a potential tool. Emily's plan was a game, and she was already several moves ahead. They had believed they controlled her fate, but she had the true advantage: knowledge, observation, and careful strategy. The escape was not just possible, it was inevitable. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the execution of the plan. She would move quietly, manipulate the machines, distract the scientists, and slip through the doors. Each step had been rehearsed, each action had a purpose, and each detail had been accounted for. She would use patience, cleverness, and timing to turn the room from a prison into a path to freedom. And deep inside, Emily felt a growing confidence. They had underestimated her. They had believed she was only a subject. But she was a thinker, a planner, and a survivor. Every experiment they conducted, every test they performed, had only made her smarter, more aware, and more prepared. The plan was ready, and the moment to act would come soon. When it did, Emily would show them the true power of a mind that refused to be controlled. The facility was silent, almost unnaturally so. Emily had waited for this moment for days, watching, memorizing, and planning every detail. The bright lights in the room were dimmed for the night cycle, and the machines emitted only faint hums. The scientists had assumed she was calm, asleep, or too weary to act. They had no idea how carefully she had prepared. Tonight she would move. She shifted slowly in her restraints, careful not to make a sound. Years of observation had taught her exactly how far she could move before the sensors reacted. Her wrists and ankles were still bound, but she had found the small slack that allowed her to manipulate the nearest control panels. She pressed the buttons in the precise order she had memorized. A soft click echoed as the first door panel unlocked. Her heart pounded, but she stayed calm. Every move was deliberate. Every breath was measured. Emily had set up distractions in advance. She had noticed that one of the machines could be made to beep by pressing 2 buttons in sequence. She used it now. The sudden sound made Paul, who was monitoring the screens, rush to the room in confusion. Claire, hearing the noise, adjusted a lever incorrectly, causing a blinking light to flash. Dr. Harris muttered angrily and ran toward the control center. In seconds, the scientists were scattered, responding to events they believed were unplanned. Emily smiled faintly. Their focus was divided, just as she had planned. She moved next to a panel that controlled a security door. Her fingers worked carefully, pressing the exact combination of buttons she had rehearsed in her mind. A soft hum signaled the door unlocking. Emily waited, listening for any sign that a scientist had noticed. The hall beyond was dark, but she had memorized every step. She slid the door open slowly and slipped inside, moving silently, her body low, almost gliding across the floor. The corridor stretched before her, lined with cameras and sensors. Emily's preparation paid off. She had memorized each camera's rotation and each sensor's timing. She moved between blind spots, avoiding detection. Every step was calculated, every pause intentional. The path she had memorized in her mind felt like a secret map unfolding. She pressed lightly on panels along the walls to unlock secondary doors, each one opening just long enough for her to slip through. She reached the area with the mechanical arms, the place where she had once been terrified during experiments. Now it felt like an ally. She knew which levers would stop the arms temporarily and which controls would create distractions for the scientists. She triggered one lever, causing a robotic arm to move unexpectedly. Lights flashed, and the sounds drew the scientist's attention back again. Emily stayed hidden in the shadows, watching as they ran from one room to another, confused and frustrated. Her mind remained sharp, calculating the next moves. She reached a door that led to a small maintenance hallway. The lock was controlled by a keypad she had studied before. She pressed the buttons in the exact sequence she had memorized. A faint beep confirmed success and the door clicked open. She slipped inside and paused for a moment, listening. The scientists were still occupied, checking alarms, running to control panels and communicating urgently with each other. Their confidence in her inability to escape was now their weakness. Emily's escape continued through a series of corridors and doors. Each step had been rehearsed, each movement memorized. She pressed buttons that triggered lights and minor alarms in different areas, ensuring the scientists remained distracted. She felt a thrill, not from fear, but from the satisfaction of seeing her plan unfold perfectly. Every observation she had made, every mark she had left for herself, every detail she had memorized, had led to this moment. Finally, she reached the area near the outer gates. The security system here was more complex, with cameras, sensors, and a main control panel. Emily studied it carefully, recalling every detail she had memorized during her weeks of observation. Her fingers moved quickly and accurately, pressing the sequence of buttons that would disable the main system. Lights blinked rapidly, alarms were temporarily silenced, and the gate mechanism unlocked. She held her breath, waiting for any sign of detection. There was none. Her escape was almost complete. Emily pushed the gate open slowly, careful to avoid creaking hinges. The night air hit her face, cold and refreshing. She stepped outside under the stars, feeling the ground beneath her feet for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Freedom was sweet, more than she had imagined. But it was not brute strength that had won it for her. It was intelligence, patience, and careful planning. Every moment of observation, every subtle mark, every mental rehearsal had led her here. She paused, listening. The facility still buzzed faintly behind her, lights flickering in the windows, alarms still occasionally sounding from distant rooms. The scientists would soon realize she was gone. Dr. Harris would be furious, Paul confused, and Claire frantic. But they had underestimated her, just as she had predicted. They had thought a subject could never outsmart them, but Emily had. Her mind immediately shifted to survival beyond the facility. She had memorized the surrounding area, pathways, and the nearest roads. She moved quietly, keeping to the shadows, avoiding any patrols or sensors that might detect her presence. Every step was careful, but her confidence grew. The world outside was vast and unknown, but it was hers now to navigate. She was free, and her freedom had been earned through cleverness, not force. As she moved farther from the building, Emily thought back to the experiments. Each test, each flash of light, each sound of a machine had prepared her. What had seemed terrifying had become her teacher. The machines and the scientists had unknowingly trained her mind, teaching her patience, observation, and strategic thinking. She had turned captivity into an advantage, learning more in that room than most people could in years outside. Emily walked along the quiet path, feeling the night air on her skin. She looked up at the stars, bright and endless above her. For a long moment, she allowed herself to simply breathe, to enjoy the sensation of being free. Every step she had taken, every calculation she had made, had been leading to this. She felt the satisfaction of knowing that her intelligence had carried her through, that careful thought and observation could overcome even the most secure prison. But even as she savored her freedom, Emily knew she could not stop. The world beyond the facility was unpredictable. She would need to stay alert, continue observing, and think carefully about every move. Survival required the same skills she had used to escape: patience, cleverness, and careful planning. She felt ready for it. She had survived the facility and she would survive the world beyond. Emily's escape was not just an act of physical movement, it was the triumph of her mind. She had outsmarted machines, humans, and a system designed to control her. Each step had been calculated, every move precise, every distraction perfectly timed. She had learned to anticipate, to adapt, and to use intelligence as her greatest tool. The experience had shown her the power of careful thought over brute force. As the stars stretched endlessly above her, Emily felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The facility, once a prison, had become a classroom. The scientists who had thought themselves clever had underestimated the power of her mind. Her freedom was proof that intelligence, observation, and patience could overcome even the most advanced technology. She smiled quietly, knowing that she had earned something far more valuable than escape: confidence in her own abilities and the knowledge that she could face any challenge with her mind as her greatest weapon. Emily continued moving through the night, shadows hiding her path, lights of the facility fading behind her. Every step was deliberate, measured, and purposeful. She was no longer a subject. She was a strategist, a survivor, and a human who had proven that thought could triumph over control. The stars above seemed to shine a little brighter for her that night, a quiet acknowledgement of her victory. The freedom she had won was more than physical. It was proof of her ingenuity, her patience, and her courage. Emily understood that the mind, when trained carefully and used wisely, could achieve what force alone never could. She had escaped, but she had also transformed herself. Every lesson from the experiments, every detail memorized, every mark left for guidance had built her into someone who could survive, adapt, and outthink any obstacle in her path. She walked on, stepping lightly over rocks and small obstacles, careful to avoid detection, but filled with a quiet joy. Her plan had worked perfectly, and now she was free to chart her own course. The world was vast, dangerous, and unknown, but it was hers. Emily had learned that freedom could be won, and it was far sweeter when achieved with intelligence, not strength. Her mind had been her weapon, her guide, and her salvation, and she would never forget the lesson it had taught her. The stars remained constant above her as she moved from place to place, guiding, teaching, and protecting. Emily felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had survived captivity, outsmarted her captors, and ensured that her knowledge would help others. Her story was no longer just about escape, it was about resilience, intelligence, and the courage to act. She had transformed fear into action and weakness into strength. Emily smiled quietly, reflecting on everything she had accomplished. The world was vast and full of challenges, but she was prepared. She had proven that human ingenuity could triumph over even the most advanced technology, that intelligence and courage were more powerful than fear, and that patience and observation could overcome almost any obstacle. Her freedom, earned with cleverness rather than force, was sweeter than she could have imagined. And so Emily continued her journey, always moving, always learning, and always helping others. She had escaped the facility, but more importantly, she had discovered her own strength and the power of the human mind. Her story inspired hope, courage, and cleverness across colonies and planets. Emily knew that as long as she stayed smart, vigilant, and determined, she would remain free, and she would continue to teach others how to claim their freedom too. Emily moved through the night, each step taking her farther from the facility that had once been her prison. The stars stretched endlessly above her, cold and bright, but for the first time, the world felt open and full of possibility. Every careful movement, every observation she had made, and every small mark she had left behind had led to this moment. She was free, but freedom alone was not enough. She had to ensure that her experience could make a difference. The first days after escaping were cautious. Emily avoided populated areas, sticking to quiet paths and isolated shelters. She needed time to recover, to think, and to plan her next steps. Her mind, honed from weeks of observation, was sharper than ever. She memorized routes, mapped out safe havens, and carefully noted any signs of danger. Survival required patience, and she had learned patience better than anyone could imagine. Emily also reflected on what had happened in the facility. The machines, the tests, the scientists, they had tried to control her mind, to reduce her to a subject. But their failure had taught her something valuable. Intelligence, observation, and cleverness could overcome almost any obstacle. She had learned to use every detail, every small clue, and every opportunity to her advantage. Now she could apply these lessons not only to survive but also to help others. Word spread quickly among the nearby colonies about a young woman who had escaped a high-security research facility. At first, people were skeptical, thinking it was impossible to outsmart such advanced technology and careful scientists. But Emily's story was too precise to ignore. She described how she had observed patterns, memorized routines, and used the facility's own machines to create distractions. Her tale of intelligence and patience inspired those who heard it. Emily did not keep her knowledge to herself. She sought out others who had been trapped or experimented on, guiding them carefully to safety. Using the techniques she had learned, she taught them how to observe, how to anticipate, and how to act without drawing attention. Slowly, she built a network of people who could protect themselves and escape from control, turning fear into strength. Each success reinforced her belief in the power of human ingenuity. Even beyond the colonies, news of her clever escape spread across planets. Scientists, engineers, and ordinary people marveled at the story. Emily became a symbol of courage and cleverness, proof that the human mind could triumph over technology designed to dominate it. Her example showed that even the most advanced machines and the most careful humans could be outsmarted by patience, intelligence, and strategy. Emily's own skills continued to grow. She practiced observation wherever she went, studying people and machines with care. She noticed patterns in small communities, in daily routines, and even in communication methods. Her mind, trained in the facility, was now a tool to protect and empower herself and others. Each day brought new lessons, and she embraced them with the confidence of someone who had survived the impossible. The more people she helped, the more Emily realized how valuable her experience was. There were others who had been subjects, trapped in places far worse than the facility she had escaped. They lacked the knowledge to survive or escape. Emily became a teacher, a guide, and a protector. She shared simple, practical methods for observation, pattern recognition, and careful action. She showed others that intelligence could be a weapon, and that courage combined with cleverness could overcome fear. Emily also took time to reflect on her own journey. She remembered the first moments in the bright, sterile room, when she had felt helpless and scared. She remembered the experiments, the machines, and the scientists who had underestimated her. She realized that each terrifying moment had become a lesson, each test a chance to learn. What had seemed like a prison had, in fact, trained her mind, sharpened her instincts, and prepared her for survival in the world. Her story spread not only as a tale of escape but also as a lesson in resilience. People across colonies and planets learned from her experience. Leaders took note of her strategies, engineers marveled at her understanding of systems, and ordinary citizens found inspiration in her patience and intelligence. Emily's journey became proof that fear could be transformed into strength, and that careful observation could turn weakness into opportunity. Even as she helped others, Emily remained vigilant. She knew the world still contained danger, and that some would try to control, capture, or manipulate. But she was ready. Her mind, honed by observation, planning, and experience, was sharper than any trap, any machine, or any person who might challenge her. Freedom was not just a gift, it was a responsibility. She had survived, and now she would help ensure that others could survive too. Emily also realized the value of patience. The escape had taught her that quick, impulsive actions could fail, but careful planning and observation would succeed. She applied this lesson to every part of her life now. Each choice, each movement, each interaction was deliberate. She analyzed situations before acting, anticipating possible outcomes and preparing responses. The skills that had saved her were now part of her daily life, shaping how she lived in the world. Over time, Emily's influence grew. Communities learned to recognize patterns, to anticipate dangers, and to act strategically. Her story became a model for training others, proving that intelligence and courage could overcome even the most advanced technology. She became a mentor for those who had been experimented on, teaching them to regain control over their minds and lives. Every person she helped became a living testament to the power of clever thinking. Emily herself continued to explore new places, seeking knowledge and understanding. She visited research colonies, studied machinery, and observed human behavior in ways she never had before. Her mind, once focused entirely on survival and escape, now sought to understand the world and to ensure that control and manipulation could never dominate her again. She had turned her terrifying experience into a tool for empowerment, not just for herself, but for anyone who needed it.